significant investments in open space through the mid-2000s as well. And then today we fund projects like the Montezuma Inspire Coalition, and these are youth from the Inspire Coalition on the Dolores River, splash pads, splash parks at the local swimming pool, and mountain biking trails that really spur the local economy here in Montezuma County. Lone Mesa and Minka State Park have received significant GOCO funds since inception. Over $5.5 million has been invested in Lone Mesa, and that includes significant dollars for acquisition of the park in the in the early years of GOCO. And Lone Mesa last year was one of the first recipients of the Director's Innovation Fund to study energy and recreational development in a park that is yet to be yet to be developed. So that was an exciting grant. And speaking of the Director's Innovation Fund, we are on the tail end of that process right now. The recommended projects will be in front of the GOCO board next week, and I will be really excited at July to do an in-depth overview of the 9 recommended projects. This year we had $150,000 to award, and we received applications for 23 projects requesting over $320,000, and that was a little bit lower than the 31 projects we received last year, but the slate of projects this year was super strong and really exciting projects, and I hope that those that weren't recommended aren't discouraged and think about coming in next year. So some themes include youth fishing ponds, historic restoration, and a dark skies initiative out on the Eastern Plains. One of the recommended projects as well will also help support the agency's work with drones, and Regional Manager Prenzlow will be talking about that in a little bit. And some exciting joint marketing efforts. The final section of the Colorado Birding Trail was finished earlier this year, and so CPW and GOCO really helped or worked really hard to get the word out about that project, especially before partners. And then cash is always a highlight on our social media channels. This week is the launch of Generation Wild Summer 2. So I'm going to show you some of our new creative that you should start seeing in the Metro Denver and Colorado Springs area. This year we're also able to push our digital and television advertising statewide. Last year, because of budget reasons, we couldn't do that, but you'll hopefully start seeing Generation Wild marketing on television channels in all corners of the state, including down here, which sometimes you don't get anything related to Denver. And this year there's a new twist on the campaign. So we are really trying to be thoughtful about moms don't want to be nagged, and they don't want to be told that they're doing something wrong in terms of that they have to be doing something additional when it comes to
that for us.
Yeah. But we did want to encourage families and push them a little bit harder than we did last year. So this year's theme is all about letting kids free. They're not gonna break in half if they get banged up a little bit, falling out of a tree or scraping their knee. So it's that's kind of the twist this year. And I have a video that you should start seeing. So this is the launch week, so you should start seeing Generation Wild pop up. The fort is at REI right now in downtown Denver, and the summer schedule for that, I think it goes to the Denver Zoo next, and hopefully Pueblo at the end of the summer. And it was great, again, to talk to the educators and interpreters yesterday and pass out a bunch of lists of 100 things to do. outside. And, you know, GOCO office is here to support state parks efforts, and we're happy to send swag across the state. Last year, we regional managers identified 2 parks in each region to really be Generation Wild ambassadors, and this year we hope to make that partnership even stronger, because the state parks were a great way to get out that message. And so again, new twists. This is what you see. This is what they see. You see a pile of dirt and some to-do lists for the garden in the weekend, and they see Mount Everest. And again with the sprinkler. So a little bit different twist this year on Generation Wild. And finally, GOCO has 3 open positions right now, and I will send this announcement to Adrian. So we'd love you to pass it out to your networks. I know that Bob and Madeline have been doing a lot of work on that end for us. So 2 openings in our land acquisition and land protection office, and then an executive and operations coordinator. And we want to, we don't have 3 open positions very often, so it's exciting, and we're also a little short-staffed at GOCO. And that's it for me today.
Commissioners, questions and comments for Ms. Urbani? Emily, I had a couple. Just on Generation Wild, as you know, I'm a big supporter of that. It's an expensive program, and I know just observing the Finance Committee at GOCO that they're watching the dollars very closely. But then I'm hoping I misinterpreted what you said. It's not penetrating over here to the western slope? So
last year, because of budget reasons, the television ads, the media buys, this corner of the state, which is a unique media market, didn't receive Generation Wild marketing. And I think that there was maybe some pockets around Grand Junction that also didn't see that on televisions, but this year the entire state is getting plastered in Generation Wild.
It's because they get New Mexico television.
Yeah.
I mean, Albuquerque
Yeah.
is the channel.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's always an equity thing, because I think if we're not struggling as much as we can to treat the entire state, then we can't necessarily expect the entire state to support our programs.
Right.
So thank you for that clarification. Any other comments or questions, Commissioners?
I have a tagline for your video. Scars are like tattoos, only have more character.
Yes, and this year for Generation Wild, we're creating Band-Aids, and some of them say, "This is my badge of honor," and stuff exactly like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, next up is Mr. McLaughlin. Previously, your presentation has been described as the most important thing we do, so not to put the pressure on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Craig McLaughlin, the Terrestrial Section Manager, and this afternoon I'd like to present 2 herd management plans to the Commission. These are action items. You'll recall that you saw both of these plans presented in draft form to you at the March meeting. The first one is the E5 herd management plan, or the West Elk Mountains herd. And this is awkward. Okay, this herd plan is really the result of the merging of 2 previous herd plans. The idea here is to redistribute the timing of hunting across the landscape, to better manage elk, and to provide better hunting opportunity. This herd is located to the north of Gunnison. You're looking at a herd that encompasses about 1,300 square miles. Most of it is, 3/4 of it is public land. It includes portions of Gunnison, Delta, and Montrose counties. And it has been managed partially with over-the-counter licensing and partially with limited licensing. And so I'll spend a little bit of time on the population history and then move into the management issues and the recommendations. Population history of this herd is very similar to The discussion that ensued here a few minutes back about the declining elk populations elsewhere. This is by design. This herd was back in the late 1980s was far above the desired population objective, and you'll see the red line in this graph is the population objective that's currently in place of about 6,000 animals. The herd had increased to as much as 14,000 animals back, and again in the late 80s. And we've taken steps as an agency to reduce those numbers down to a population level that is within carrying capacity of the habitat. You also had some discussions with us over the last several months about elk calf-cow ratios and concerns over that in the southern portion of the state. This is just I'm going to spend just a minute on this graph. This is just a graph that shows the measured post-hunt calves per 100 cows, and the fact that it has reduced by about 10 calves per 100 cows over the last several years. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the public input process. There was quite a bit of public input received in the design of this plan. We had live audience polling, an internet-based approach, and this particular slide shows the sideboards that were placed on management options. So we looked at a decline as far as 35% in the herd, and as high as 35 or 40% of the herd. The hearing from different groups, I wanted just to report that our average desires from our hunters were to increase the herd by about 15%. Non-agricultural landowners indicated a desire to increase by 14%, and agricultural landowners by 9%. So there was a general interest in some increase in herd numbers from the current. And this was a result of, again, quite a bit of input. We solicited input from other government organizations, received over 20 letters, and had 7 meetings, as well as the internet polling. So to work through the significant issues, I wanted to spend just a little bit of time on this map. This is a heat map that shows the distribution, and by heat map what I'm talking about is the 2 different color groupings that you'll see on this map. First off, the issue is that elk have been distributed in some refuge areas, particularly in GMU 54 in the lower right-hand corner of the map. There, we're finding them outside of the hunting area during the hunting season. The issue really is that the blue on this map shows distribution of elk during the wintertime when we're counting them. So we're finding elk in GMU 54 in the southern portion of that, and also elk over in the western portion of this map when we're counting them. And we're using those counts to obviously estimate populations and then determine harvesting. Well, hunters have been telling us they're not finding elk in Unit 54 during the hunting season. As you look at the, I'm getting this to work, there we go. Look at the distribution in the orange and red. This is the distribution of elk during the hunting season. And there's no wonder the hunters in GMU 54 were telling us they weren't finding elk. The elk were moving out of 54, largely out of 54 into the adjoining units during the hunting period. This has been a problem for us in terms of providing hunting opportunity, and it's the reasoning behind merging these 2 previously smaller herds into one large herd and managing it as one large herd in this particular plan. What we are planning on doing is addressing that movement problem, as well as addressing the interests of the public in increasing herd numbers with this new set of plan objectives. So let's talk about the management plan alternatives. In terms of population size, current population is being managed at about 66 to 7,600 elk. We're at 7,000 elk right now. The desired or preferred population size that's recommended by the agency in this plan is to increase by about 17% to a range of 7,800 to 8,800 elk. In terms of herd composition, we've been managing for 18 to 23 bulls per 100 cows. There's been a desire to have a bit higher quality in the herd, and so we'll be proposing a herd composition objective of 23 to 28 bulls per 100 cows. And I'd like to talk about the license allocation strategy because I think that's the point of interest here as much as anything. We'd be looking at changing the allocation of cow licenses among those GMUs so that we can start to move elk around and allow hunters to get access to elk during the hunting season. So the way in which we allocate cow licenses and will be to do just that. What we can do is shift our hunters by shifting the hunt codes where we have higher numbers of cow elk tags to areas where the elk are actually living during the hunting season. That's the concept here. So we're adding this in the executive summary. We're adding an implementation, a couple of implementation paragraphs to describe how we'll try to achieve our objectives. First, achieving the 17% increase in population by decreasing cow tags as needed to allow the population to increase. Maintaining our bull ratio objective of adjusting the first, and the muzzleloader licenses as needed to maintain the numbers of bulls per 100 cows. And again, look at adjusting our license allocation strategy. So we'll reduce cow tags in the early seasons in GMU 54 when they're not there, but we'll be hunting cows later when and at times when the cows are available to the hunters. In the near future, we're going to consider modifying the current combined licenses in Unit 53 and 54, examining sub-GMUs for distributing hunters. In other words, perhaps becoming even more fine-tuned in the licensing structure so that we can put hunters in spots to get at the elk. And then to continue to expand programs to place more hunting pressure on private lands, because even though most of the land here is public, there are places where, particularly on private land, where elk are finding refuge, and we'd like to be able to work with those private landowners to make those elk available to hunters. I believe that does it for that particular management plan. Are there questions for me?
Commissioner Vehil.
Greg, thank you. It's not a question, it's a comment. The graph of calf-cow ratios, it's an ugly graph. I mean, the data is ugly. The presentation of the graph is perfect.
Dale's like, I'm sorry.
And I think I mentioned this at the draft, is I would love to see that same graph in every herd management, every elk herd management, because our dream, I think, on this commission is to see that reversed. If you could invert that graph and show it growing at some point in the future, that would be terrific.
We'd love to see that too, and I think first we have to understand exactly why this is happening, and then we can start to take some intelligent steps to reversing it.
Exactly, and that's why I'm saying, can you put this in every one of our elk herd management?
We can certainly do that in these upcoming plans as they come to you. Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention at the beginning of this, this was, this plan, I'm just up here as a mouthpiece presenting it the second time. This plan is the result of a lot of field staff time. Kevin Blecka is the area biologist, presented this, as you'll recall, to you the first time. I think they've done a great job in reaching out to the public and trying to address interest from the public as well as our biological concerns.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Craig, I especially appreciate this presentation for the second time. I know I've been harping on staff now for several years that we needed to see these more often, and we need to see them in more detail and take them off the consent agenda and on and on and on, and every time you're improving it, and my kudos go to you. I especially like your implementation strategies put down in writing, and gives us something to monitor. But I do have a goal that I need to make staff shudder at least once every meeting, and I've emphasized this several times, but we have such a dynamic, changing environment. Some of it natural, some of it not. Drought, hard winter, all the population dynamics our state's experiencing, water issues, whatever they may be. These plans stay in place too long. They need to be revisited, and I know it's a tremendous amount of work, but I would like to see these revisited every 5-6 years. And so that's my shudder comment for this particular.
I'm shuddering. Yeah. We are, as you're well aware, I believe, we're making quite an effort to catch ourselves up with all the plans that we have, and that is becoming a
I understand.
huge effort. But we'll continue to work with you to do the best we can with these plans. And as in any planning process, there's got to be some flexibility in it. But from a biological standpoint, I think you're well aware of this. We need some consistency from year to year in the information we collect, and in setting our objectives, and being able to monitor trends to see whether we're achieving those objectives. So it's this balancing act between the length of the plan and being very flexible.
Well, I totally understand, and I do appreciate that. And I agree, when I was on previous commissions, your 10-year plan went on for 20 years a lot of times.
And I will
I'm
admit,
seeing a dramatic improvement. But I encourage you to keep going. Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Commissioner Peisel.
Thanks, Craig, for all the hard work, and it seems like we're making progress on the budget and these plans, and they're more user-friendly. And maybe the suggestion that we had before, maybe it doesn't have to be a full-blown plan in 5 years. Maybe we monitor it. Maybe, you give me my visuals, and in 3 years or 5 years, we have the graph that says, we're making progress, or we're still not making progress, or we're losing ground. And instead of 10 years out going, yeah, we find out the results. So it doesn't have to be a full plan. It has to be maybe a short graph that says we're making progress. I don't know. Anyway, something to think about. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Vehil.
If there are no further comments, I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Vehil. Motion to,
The motion to approve this elk herd management plan for the West Elk Mountains.
second from Commissioner Peisel. Any public comment, since we have a motion on the floor? Seeing none, Adrian, would you please call the roll?
Bray?
Yes.
Haskett? Hauser? Heisel? Vigil?
Yes.
Wingfield?
Yes.
Zimmerman? And Chairman Howard.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
On to the next, Craig?
Yes. This next herd management plan is for the Buffalo Peaks elk herd. Now, this is one of those plans in a process that, as you may recall, when Brian Dreer presented the draft to you in March, he mentioned that this was a bit of a new approach to us. And I hope this doesn't make you shudder, Commissioner Bray, but this is one of those plans that, with review of the management objectives, there is no underlying any major issue or concerns that would cause us to need to do a full-blown rewriting of the plan and reassessment. We did reassess all these management objectives, but our intent here is to extend the current management objectives. I'll tell you that up front for this particular plan. You may recall that. This Buffalo Peaks herd plan is about just under 1,700 square miles, and it's portions of Park, Fremont, Chaffee, and Lake counties. And see if I can get this up. It is up on the board. Okay, thank you. This particular herd, as I mentioned, we're not seeing a place where either the staff or the public thought that management was going anything but very well, and so we're requesting an extension of those objectives. Here's a quick look at the history of the population estimates. You'll notice that this is from 1990 through 2016. You'll notice that you see a population decline. The blue line in the graph, by the way, is the population estimate, and the two dotted red lines are the objective band of population objectives that we'd be shooting for. There is an indication that in the first 10 years or so, population decline, and the local biologists tell me that the data collection prior to 2005 was very limited, and we don't have as much confidence in those numbers, but we do have a lot of confidence in the numbers since 2005, and those population estimates collected quite a bit of information on the herd since then. So the herd has been, as the line indicates, the herd has been trending along just a bit higher than the actual intended population objective. The observed cow-calf ratios for this herd are more stable. As you might expect, point estimates from year to year do bounce around, but they're relatively stable, and they're considerably higher. They're in the 40 to 50 calves per 100 cow band. So the important issues that we have and the opportunities for this herd are we're looking for maintaining quality elk hunting opportunities, addressing agricultural conflict at the lower elevation winter range, and developing and the idea that there's continuing development within the winter range, specifically into low density housing. So the current status of the herd post 2016 is a population estimate of around 3,900 elk. The objective is from 3,100 to 3,500 elk. Sex ratio estimate modeled was 31 bulls per 100 cows. Observed is our counts are from are 29 per 100, and the objective is 35 to 40 bulls per 100 cows. So the proposed population size and composition is, as I mentioned, is an extension. We maintain the same post-hunt population objectives, same sex ratio objective, and let me just pause and speak briefly about strategies to achieve those objectives. Well, to reduce that herd slightly into the objective range, we would will be increasing cow harvest slightly, and we have a slight decrease in the bull harvest to allow for a higher bull-cow ratio. Just to briefly talk about public input, this has not been as much public input as the previous herd plan you just received a presentation on, but there were 2 public meetings, and we did contact and have a conversation with 2 of the HPP committees that cover this herd. The harvest survey indicated hunter crowding and satisfaction levels were very favorable. There was no concerns over that. We also, in terms of strategies, we'll be looking to maintain the private land season to reduce any conflicts on private property and continue to monitor that.
What a tremendous amount of work to do these plans, I know, so I really want to thank you for the effort. So why would we think that that this herd is doing pretty well? Cow-calf ratios, the visual kind of seems stable, and it's just a hill across the valley from our herds that are not doing so well. So what in the heck's the difference?
It's an excellent question.
I know. What's an excellent answer?
I don't have that excellent answer for you yet. I can tell you that the neonatal research study is going on there, is having some success this year in terms of putting transmitters on calves. I received word that there's 38 calves monitored right now in Montrose as of yesterday, and 29 in Trinidad. So we'll continue to investigate, and hopefully we'll have an excellent answer for you sooner rather than later, and we can put that answer to work.
Excellent.
Any other comments or questions, Commissioner? This is a final action item.
I'll move to extend this herd management plan. Is that the correct motion? We're extending this one, right?
To accept the extended plan extension.
Second from Commissioner Vehil. Why don't I restate that? So this is a motion to approve the E22 Buffalo Peaks Elk Final Herd Management Plan. Is that right? Very good. Adrian, would you please call the roll? Oh, wait, public comment. Council almost had me there. Do we have any public comment? I don't think so. Anyone in the audience like to come forward and comment? Very good. Adrian, please call the roll.
Bray?
Yes.
Haskett? Yes. Hauser? Peisel?
Yes.
Vehil?
Yes.
Wingfield?
Yes.
Zimmerman? And Chairman Howard.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, yes, Commissioner Bray.
I hate to interrupt the flow of the meeting, but we do have a state senator and a state rep in the audience that happen to come from my district. And
You're stealing my thunder, but please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I would, and Senator Coram actually sponsored our Future Generations bill, one of the sponsors anyway. And, I wanted to recognize that Senator Coram and Representative Catlin are in the audience, and appreciate them attending our meeting.
And a great segue for me to invite you to dinner tonight if you can fit us in. We'd love to have you. Great. Okay, Mr. Grother from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, my name is Craig Grother, and I'm with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I was here to talk to you a little bit about the State Trails Grant Program. It's something that we have been looking into lately and, interacting with the Trails Committee, but I thought I'd go ahead and bring it to your attention as well. See if I can hit the right button here. Probably not. There we go. So if you haven't heard of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, BHA was established back in 2004 out in the state of Oregon by 7 founding members around a campfire. Colorado chapter was actually the first one. It was official chapter in 2005. And the last few years, the membership in BHA has really exploded. There's approximately 622 members in Colorado back in 2017, and that has escalated to well over 1,300 as of today. We just had our annual chapter rendezvous by Twin Lakes here last weekend. I'd say that there was about 45 people that showed up. The demographics is definitely changing. It seemed like I was in a Marine boot camp. There was so many younger men, which was great to not have just us old graybeards there. And family members too. So anyway, there's currently 35 chapters in the U.S. and Canada with well over 20,000 members now. The national rendezvous was in Boise here this year. I think there was something like, I don't know, a couple thousand people that attended that one. So what we're about is we're public lands focused, and we want to keep that in our public hands. We're, concerned about the long-term conservation of those still wild and largely unspoiled backcountry habitat areas for wildlife and for our traditional hunting and fishing endeavors. We also highly believe and support science-based wildlife management under the North American model for wildlife management. And we also promote access to public lands in such a way as, well, one of our mottos is the adventure begins at the end of the trail, at the end of the road. So we're not necessarily looking to put roads all over public lands, but to at least have access to those lands for our enjoyment. And we also adhere to the principles of fair chase. And I think just last year, CPW responded to one of our concerns using drones for scouting, for instance, and actually came up with a regulation against that, which was awesome. Thank you. So looking at recreation, I think anyone who goes out on public lands sees a lot more use now. We particularly, and this may lead further to the discussion that's been going on here today about impacts to populations of elk particularly. But we, as hunters, are out in the woods a lot. It's not just during hunting season. We kind of live to be outdoors, and, we're very grateful for the privilege to go feral each fall and get out there and do our hunting and gathering. But what we see throughout the state, really, in the mountainous areas of public lands, is a proliferation of new trails into our backcountry areas and key wildlife habitats too. And there's a lot of emphasis being placed on more trails and development of more trail systems for people to enjoy, which is all great, but it's not compatible with wildlife in every case. Often the trail systems are currently designed and built by the proponents outside the agencies. We see that a lot, particularly with mountain biking. And that's a concern that we have. That process that the federal agencies go through, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, is very inclusive of the public. And the trails planning that we see going on seems to be centered and focused on the proponents of those trails and the people that, and communities, rural communities, resort towns that are to benefit from the development of these trails. And we also see, in addition to that, mountain bike people particularly building trails that are totally outside of any agency awareness. Many of our members just last weekend were telling me their stories of going turkey hunting and just coming upon trails that were constructed, oftentimes with tools, that, I mean, unless it was cliffed out, there was a trail everywhere. What's going on there? Okay, so are you messing with me there? And there's an exponential increase in this recreation in all of our habitats. In the Norwood area where I live, I have an example in Burn Canyon, for instance, it's called. Trails being developed in Winter Range. I mean, there's already enough pressure with us developing and living in Winter Range, and now adjacent to that little community is another bike system. And it's just occurring, we feel, at an exponential rate. We're concerned really about the lack of oversight and management by the BLM and the Forest Service in some cases. Of course, they can't do anything about the pirate trails. They try to. I mean, I had the opportunity to work for the Forest Service for 33 years. I understand that, you know, our resources are limited and you can't always be everywhere at the same time. But really, there's, in our opinion, there's poor user compliance with travel management plans that we work so hard to get together and create a balanced, you know, experience where you have the opportunity for hiking, we'll say, or horseback riding in one area, the mountain bike trails in another, motorized recreation. It's a combination, okay? And oftentimes what we're seeing, even in the applications for grants, is it looks like it was reviewed by CPW biologists, and I understand now that there is a process for that. I've become more educated in the whole process through Nick Delica, and I really appreciate his help with that. But seasonal closures, for instance, are an example of something that's commonly included in approval of these trails. So back to Burn Canyon, I've watched this be developed, and the seasonal closures are on mountain biking. Well, 2 years ago, we did have winter there, and, you know, people just go there quite often and walk with their dogs. They ski there now. This is uses on a trail system that was never, ever anticipated. Last year, this previous winter, we had no snow, and the mountain biking just never stopped. And there's no clear message on the ground from the BLM in this case to, I mean, people ride by signs, or the signs fall down and that sort of thing. So, I mean, that could be improved. That's always an ongoing thing, but there's no law enforcement presence there. There's one officer in Montrose, Colorado that covers, you know, a bazillion acres. And the DWMs, I guess they can do it in there as collateral duty, but I'm sure they have plenty to do without doing that. So that's my point there. And also, as we've been talking about here at the last CPW meeting in Grand Junction and here today, is we're seeing impacts to our big game populations, particularly elk, and our hunting opportunities. So I know there's a lot of variables in that, but I would suggest that in places with high densities of trails and use, that it completely displaces the game, that they are responsive to that activity. It's fragmenting the habitat, it's driving them away.
Mr. Grother?
Yes.
We got about 4 or 5 minutes left.
Okay.
And I want to leave time for commissioners to
Okay.
ask you questions, so.
All right, so I'll try to buzz through this thing real fast. So we've, as BHA has looked into this, and we put together some papers, and there's a few extra copies over there if the audience wants them. I think they're attached to your information. But there is science to back up what I'm talking about. We also put together information on our observations and some mitigations that we suggest. So back to the Trails program, I'll skip to this a couple of slides. We've been involved in the travel management planning with the agencies. We see problems with the Trails program, funding, planning outside that process. We've tried to educate ourselves more on the Trails Grant program, and this is what I understand of it, that OHV grants, you have good management or competitive grants. The competitive are construction and equipment, funding for crews, all that good stuff. The non-motorized side, you have construction and you have planning. There is no money being put into management of these trails whatsoever that we can tell. I think that's something that could be done. It would be great to see, you know, I'll just throw out a third of their budget would go into conservation, if you want to call it that, stewardship. I'd just like to see this become a program that's not just trail users, but stewards of the land as well as the hunters. You know, money's always a problem, and I think there are lots and lots of committees looking for solutions here, but we as hunters are chipping into the conservation of our lands, the management of our populations, the law enforcement to keep us on track. We don't see that on the non-motorized side. We do see it on the motorized side. They have, I think I saw on the slide last time, 17% of the budget went into law enforcement, road decommissioning to fully implement travel plans and so forth. We would like to see mountain bikers step up financially and do the same thing. So that's, and quickly, that's what I had to say.
I appreciate that, Mr. Grother. Commissioners, comments or questions, since I rushed Mr. Grother through his presentation so you could ask comments. Commissioner Zimmerman, I thought you might have a mountain bike observation.
This might, maybe, this might come to me. Thank you so much for the presentation, and we've talked about this, and everyone hears me say this all the time. It's great that our mission includes recreation, but if we don't have the natural resources there, the land, the habitat, and the wildlife there to then go recreate on, it's not, it doesn't matter. So you can't sell a widget if you don't have said widget. So for sure, this is a very big concern to us as a commission and to everyone in this agency and everyone in the state, that as recreation demands increase, as people begin to use the outdoors as a gym, and they don't necessarily think about the impacts, our job gets harder and harder, you know, encroaching impossible. So one of the things, and you've heard a little bit about this, and we heard it at the Partners Conference, there were a lot of different messages to how do we coexist, how do we start to work together, how do we bring more people to the table, and make sure that we are, because CPW does have to cross all of those boundaries, as you mentioned, BLM, Forest Service, in order to achieve our mission. It's important that we also get everyone at the table. At the next commission meeting, you've heard we're going to do a forum that's going to speak to alternative funding mechanisms and how to get more engagement. And one of the key focus of, I think, at least in my opinion, one of the key focus for that is going to be how do we get recreation to the table. It's not just about funding, it's also about engagement. And I say that because as a mountain biker, and I'm one of those mountain bikers that I don't want mountain bikers in wilderness. I don't want yahoos like me flying by me at 20 miles an hour when I'm out in the wilderness. And we, as a mountain biker, we absolutely need to understand why CPW, what CPW is, and why we need to be engaged. And I'll say that because many of my friends don't know what CPW does. they also don't know why a trail would be closed. But if you have a chance to be at the table and to be engaged and you understand why that trail is closed, you maybe even have a chance to contribute to what trails should go where and when they should be closed and how to manage some of those user conflicts. There's a lot more self-policing. There's ownership and accountability. So I think this is something that your presentation is incredibly, an incredible segue and amazing support to have BHA in support of this very same effort that we're all working towards, which is how do we get all the recreation users and everyone who benefits from the success of CPW to the table to be able to have that back and forth to say, oh, you don't want me to go on that trail? Oh, well, here's why. And I'm gonna go, self-police everyone else too and take ownership for that. So thank you, this presentation
Yeah,
was
so,
timely.
if I happen to be walking around in Burn Canyon and somebody rides by on a bicycle, which happens, and we stop and have a conversation, the first thing that out of their mouth is like, when my kids were small, I didn't know. What are you talking about? Well, maybe there is an education element like you're talking about that could be put together by the state, and it would probably be respected, I would think.
Yeah, and I think
Commissioner Zimmerman.
as a follow-up to that, mountain bikers in general as a community, I would say we are very, as you say, there's an education component. And once you understand why, the ability to respect, and I'm just going to use the muddy trail, that's like the easy classic one that we all know when a trail is muddy, stay off of it, because you're just going to ruin it, because when it does dry out, it's going to be horrible. And so the education component and taking that self-accountability is a really big piece. If that comes with a registration or a funding or any other component, that's great. But I think that there's an avenue. We've seen it in the OHV Trails program. We've seen it in a lot of places. So I do think that there's an avenue for not only mountain bikers, but all trail users. Anytime we step in the dirt, we have an impact. So I think there's a lot of avenues out there.
Other comments or questions, commissioners? Let me just add to what Commissioner Zimmerman said. I think when we talk about this, and we've seen this today when we recognize volunteers, the engagement, when we talk about it, it's, yes, we need revenue, right? That's part of it. Yes, we need more engagement. We also need volunteers. That is so important in all of our communities, whether it's parks, volunteers, or hunting and fishing, all the volunteers in OHV. I remember when we approved the OHV budget, there it was, we were funding Youth Corps. And so this question around engagement includes, I think, a huge component. We need the volunteers from mountain bikers, from hikers, everybody else to chip in, because in the end of the day, it's that enthusiasm that actually helps us get the money on the ground. So that's just a little comment I'll make. I don't want next month's forum to be all about money, because I don't think that's the whole issue.
Right.
So,
Well, one point I was trying to make was on the OHV side, they do provide funding for seasonal crews for BLM and Forest Service. And it would be nice to mirror that with non-motorized. That was the point I was trying to make.
I think
And if there are barriers to using the funding that goes into that program, perhaps you guys could figure that out.
And I believe I'm seeing a signal from Margaret Taylor to perhaps address that. So if you want to come forward, Margaret.
Hello, my name is Margaret Taylor. I'm Assistant Director for Capital Parks and Trails, and I apologize, I have a bit of a cold, so hopefully you can understand me. We appreciate Mr. Grother's comments, and we have talked to him on numerous occasions within the Trails Program and the State Trails Committee. And basically, we do have one of the best grant funding programs in the country for a variety of reasons, and that includes our OHV program that's been a model in the country. When we talk about the non-motorized program, it's a little bit tougher because we have funding sources that aren't generated from users. We've already talked about how there is a need to put more money into non-motorized trails from users in some sort of a way, and we haven't really defined what that may mean in the future. But what I will say is that that makes it more complicated for us to do good management grants through the non-motorized program. But what the State Trails Committee is looking at right now is breaking up the way that we do non-motorized grants, which means that we would, what we're going to be talking about actually next week is separating the construction grants from maintenance grants. So we would have the opportunity for people to apply for maintenance grants. And we would have the opportunity to do some law enforcement and education within those maintenance grants. So thanks to people like Mr. Grother, we're always taking in new ideas and trying to accommodate that. So I think that we're looking at solutions within what we can do in the program. And I just wanted to mention, just very briefly, Trails is a little bit different than wildlife management. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands that with wildlife management, we do have the ability to manage wildlife off of our properties. Trails is a little bit different because the land managers are the